Welcome one and all to my channel, Sermon Time. I'm your host, Pastor Tony, and each week I've been sharing a little bit of my visit to Israel. Our message today is based on visits I made to a replica of a first century Jewish village and various ruins of the great and mighty throughout Israel. Today's message is the haves, the have-nots, and the have it all and then somes. During my visit to Israel, I was amazed that the same social structures that exist today in our country existed back in Jesus' day. Today we have the poor, the wealthy, and the super wealthy. It was the same in Bible times, so I will be citing many passages in the gospel accounts where Jesus addresses the poor, the rich, and the ultra-rich of his day, and hopefully derive some instruction and comfort from his words for us today. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21 and verse 24, Jesus is speaking to power. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So that's pretty clear, right? It seems we have to make a choice between Jesus and riches. In Luke 12, Jesus condemns the excess of the rich of his day with the parable of the rich man and his many barns. I've underlined some key words in the story I want you to note as we read through it. And Jesus said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?' So he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and then I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" In this parable, Jesus condemns excess, covetousness, abundance of possessions and crops and goods, hoarding. In the chapter just before this one, he condemned greed. Then the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees make the outside of the cup and dish clean, but your inward part is full of greed and wickedness. Foolish ones. Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But rather give alms of such things as you have." Taken together, it seems that Jesus is wanting those who have extra to share what they have with those who don't, not to hoard more and more and more for themselves. Now back in Luke 12, the next chapter, Jesus is speaking to the powerless. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you'll put on. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, which have neither storehouses nor barn, and God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by worrying, can add 1 cubit to his stature? If you then are not able to do the least, why are you anxious for the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothes the grass, which today is in the field and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor have an anxious mind. For all these things the nations of the world seek after. And your Father knows that you need these things. but seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Just to give you a little insight into just how simple most people were in the first century AD, how they lived. Here are a few pictures of a village we visited that simulated what life was like back then. When Jesus spoke these words in Capernaum, he was talking with farmers and shepherds and potters and yarn makers and fishermen and winemakers and mill workers and olive oil press operators and everyday sorts of people. Jesus tells them and us not to worry. He understood how fears plague the hearts of the poor. Where are we going to get our next meal? How will we pay our bills? Will we ever get out of debt? Don't worry. Don't be anxious, Jesus says. And you have a secret partner who comes alongside you, only you, and he will see you through. Jesus never extends this help to the rich. Never once. We have spoken about the haves and the have-nots, but now we turn our attention to the third group of people in Jesus' day, those who have it all and then some. Jesus addresses an ultra-rich and super powerful man in Luke 13, verse 32, calling him a fox. Do you know who Jesus was referring to? Herod. Herod Antipas was not only ultra-rich, but he was also very powerful. Next to Jesus, Herod Antipas and his father Herod the Great were probably the most fascinating of all the biblical characters we learned about during our visit to Israel. Let's first address Herod's power, then we'll discuss his wealth. Jesus was referring to Herod's power when he said in Matthew 20, verses 25 to 28, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Could you imagine being Herod and hearing these words of Jesus? If I want to be great, I have to become everyone's slave? You're kidding, right? I think I'll stick with the lording it over them approach. You see, Herod was extremely powerful. He had within his control the power to take the life of his citizens, even those who had done no wrong. Do you remember when Jesus was born? Herod Antipas's father, Herod the Great, caught wind of the fact from the wise men visiting from the east that a king was born, and he feared a rival to his throne had emerged. So what did he do? He ordered the death of all the young boys 2 years old and younger to be slain. That's power. That was Herod the Great, the father of Herod the Fox. Herod the Fox took the life of John the Baptist, had him beheaded to save face at a drunken feast. In our country and in our structures in the armed forces and police and so on, such a command does not have to be obeyed because it's illegal. But back then, if you disobeyed an order like this, it would cost you your life. Now let's talk about Herod's wealth, shall we? Herod did not have one palace. He had 18 of them all over Israel. We visited 3 of them, so I'll talk about them just to give you a taste of his wealth. One I introduced in an earlier message was Masada. Masada was impressive. It was an 18-acre mesa on top of a steep precipice. It was well protected, easily defensible, had plenty of stores in the middle of a desolate wasteland. It had for its own water source a sophisticated system of capturing all available rainwater and storing it in caverns inside the walls of the cliffs. Here's a look at Herod's palace on the north side of Masada. The red arrow is pointing to the palace proper on top of the mesa, and the three white arrows are pointing out three levels of it, which were literally built into the side of the cliff. His palace had bathhouses with saunas. The tubes you see along the wall, this is where steam came through and filled the room with the hot bathhouse. He also had bathtubs, pools, plural, and of course mikvahs for ritual cleansing, which may seem extremely extravagant given the dry, arid climate of the region. All watered by a sophisticated system of rainwater catch systems, filling 8 cisterns with a capacity to hold nearly 800,000 gallons of water. Royal dining halls were also part of the complex, and everything else opulence required. He had residence halls for his servants and quarters for his soldiers, had an armory with plenty of all sorts of weapons, including boiling water and oil, large stones to cast at enemies with their trebuchets, arrows, and all kinds of other weaponry. Masada even had its own synagogue. It was an entire village that could remain protected indefinitely. I'll tell the story another time of how the Romans conquered this impregnable citadel. It's a fascinating tale in and of itself. But this was Herod's palace in Masada. Then there was his palace in Jordan called Machaerus, just across the Dead Sea from Masada. This is the place where John the Baptist was imprisoned and beheaded because he spoke truth to power. The holes in the mountainside here are the holding cells of Herod's enemies. John the Baptist was kept in this cell. The prison was at the base of the mountain, and Herod's palace, of course, was at the top. Again, another mesa. This is the road we walked up to get to the top of the mesa. It had been littered with stones toppled from the structures above. The park authorities had been working on repurposing these stones to make tourists safer as they ascend the mesa. The structures of the palace on top covered the entire 1.5 acres of the mesa. Herod had learned from the Nabateans how to capture and store rainwater, enough to sustain life on this arid mountaintop indefinitely. His cisterns, watered pools, baths, and of course, mikvah. Here is the covering over the massive cistern located in the middle of the ruin. This and other cisterns of Machaerus could hold up to 10 million gallons of water. In all, Herod had 18 palaces, all built or rebuilt by his architects at Herod's direction. But by far the most fantastic of them all was Caesarea Maritima, in western Israel, on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. The pictures of this place only begin to tell the story that took our breath away. We're not talking about a palace anymore, or a fortress that included a palace. We're now talking about a whole city. This city was built by Herod the Great for the Emperor of Rome, who was at that time Octavian, also known as Caesar Augustus. Herod had come to the defense of his personal friend in Egypt, Mark Antony. But before he could arrive there to help, Caesar Augustus prevailed against Mark Antony. Suspicious of Herod's loyalties, Herod was quick to switch sides to ally himself with Caesar Augustus. As a tribute to Caesar and to prove his loyalty to the emperor, Herod built the city of Caesarea Maritima in 13 years. What we saw as we entered the city walls there was a long, long colonnade strewn all about were the remains of hundreds of broken columns. Here was an aqueduct, right, for a steady water supply. Theaters to watch the death matches between gladiators and other forms of entertaining drama. There were tracks for chariot races. several piers extending into the ports with shops and restaurants, inns and drinking establishments. The city was designed around 3 man-made harbors that made the area accessible by boat. Outlined underwater is the perimeter of the protective enclosure. Herod built multiple palaces at Caesarea. This one right over the ocean with a pool in the middle of it. This small palace also had a grand dining complex, a central hall, and was flanked by 2 rooms, one on each side, all richly decorated, complete with mosaic flooring and bathing and heating facilities. That was on the lower level. The second story contained the upper palace and, as expected, a mikveh, of which I do not have a picture because there is no longer a second story to this ruin, and this is just one of his smaller palaces. Caesarea Maritima also had a myriad of humbler residences for the working class and visitors to the citadel, a little bit further away from the shoreline. And no awesome complex like Caesarea Maritima would be complete without a prison. Yes, you know, everything an emperor should need for a cozy place to land when he comes to visit Israel. Whenever he feels like it, he can throw someone into the slammer. This cell would have held the Apostle Paul just prior to his deportation to Rome. The governor of Caesarea at the time, Felix, kept him for more than 2 years, denying him, a Roman citizen, the right to a speedy trial. Instead of waiting indefinitely for a resolution, it was here in Caesarea that Paul appealed to Caesar. He was then taken on an arduous journey to Rome. Herod built Caesarea from the ground up. Before he started his work there was nothing to look at. The harbor was completely man-made. No one in their right mind would have built a harbor here. The waters were way too rough. It was a shipper's nightmare. But Herod didn't want the emperor to land at the harbor in Tyre and then travel by land to his city. So it had to have a harbor, or 3. Herod's project would demand a new technology of building a cement barrier underwater. He started with giant floating pads, which he loaded with wet cement and positioned it over the location of the drop. He would then sink the float and allow the pads to fall into place underwater until it cured. And he would do it all over again, time and time again, until his barrier reef was completed. Not an exact method or proven technology, but even though it was a bit sloppy, it was effective. The architectural and engineering wonder of it all, the magnificence and grandeur of his building projects all over Israel, his grandiose scale and defiance of nature's laws, give you a little insight into the mindset of the ultra-rich and super-powerful Herod the Great. He was beyond rich. He was wealthy on a totally different scale. And would you care to guess just where Herod got all this money to build, or rebuild as the case may be, all these palaces? Through a very simple means at use in many countries today: tax the poor. Now, my dad was an architect, and he would have loved to have seen all that I saw in the Holy Land. And as an architect's son, I enjoyed the wonders of Caesarea. But my heart belongs to my Heavenly Father, and He would have us see past the glitter and glam of man's works in this old world. As amazing as these works were in Israel, they all lie in ruin today. And besides that, they don't even begin to compare with the architecture of the ancient Egyptians. But I'm saving that story for another time. Neither the Romans nor the Egyptians have yet constructed anything as wonderful and as incredible as this marvelous planet God created for the human family. I believe Jesus spoke to the solution the poor and powerless face in this life by directing them to consider the lilies of the field. So, I'm going to conclude this slideshow with a series of shots we took of the beautiful flowers that added so much color and hope of spring to our travels in Israel. Learn to enjoy the little things in life, and you will unlock the secret to enjoying everything in life. These are just a few of the pictures I took that turned out. My wife should put on a whole slideshow of her own of all the beautiful images she captured while in the Holy Land. But I'm not going to steal any of her thunder today. Today, we've been talking about the haves and the have-nots, and those who had way too much in Jesus' day, and the things he said to them. In a way, the world hasn't changed much, has it? The poor get poorer, and the rich get richer. And how easy it is for us to get caught up in it all, wanting what they have, coveting that which the Lord has not entrusted to us, neglecting those who have not, because we've spent it on something else. Jesus would have us consider the flowers of the field and remember, even Solomon in all his glory, and foxy Herod with all his architecture, and the emperor of Rome with the nations of the world at his disposal, were not arrayed like one of these flowers, which are here today and gone tomorrow. Regardless of our status in life, we have unfettered access to these simple beauties, and we can remember, as Jesus would have us to, that we are of much greater value to him than they are. And God will take care of us with the things we need because of who he is and what you and I mean to him. He instructs us to look out for each other, to take care of each other, to come alongside each other in our travels here. Do not seek what you should eat or what you should drink, nor have an anxious mind. For all these things the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knows that you need these things. But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. If this message today finds you stressed with the pressures of life, know that God cares for you. Let me encourage you today to seek out God's people that worship at your local Adventist church, regardless of what you have been dealt from the rich and ultra-rich of this world. I am confident you will find in God the help he promised to the poor, and the fellowship of his people who understand what it takes to get through life's stresses together. Until next week, God be with you and bless you all.